Hi, welcome back. We're just about to start Chapter 12 of The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. And Chapter 12 is entitled, Might I Have a Bit of Earth? Mary has just left the garden and headed back where she was with Dickon and is headed back to the house. Mary ran so fast that she was rather out of breath when she reached her room. Her hair was ruffled on her forehead and her cheeks were bright pink. Her dinner was waiting on the table and Martha was waiting near it. "They're a bit late," she said. "Where up in?" "I've seen Dickon," Mary said. "I've seen Dickon." "Oh, I knew he'd come," Martha said. "Does thou like him?" I think he's beautiful," said Mary in a determined voice. Martha looked rather taken aback, but she looked pleased, too. "Well," she said, "he's the best lad ever was born, but never thought him as handsome. His nose turns up too much." "I like it turned up," said Mary. "Aye, and his eyes is so round," said Mary, a trifle doubtful. "Though they're a nice colour." "I like them round," said Mary, "and they are the exact colour of the sky over the moor." Martha beamed with satisfaction. "I said he made 'em that colour with always looking at the birds and the clouds. But he has got a big mouth now, hasn't he?" "I love his big mouth," said Mary obstinately. "I wish mine were just like it." Martha clucked delightedly. "It looks round funny a bit, thy face, but I know it would be that way what he saw. Hardly like the seeds and the garden tools." "How did you know he brought them?" asked Mary. I never thought him not bringing 'em. He'd be sure to bring 'em if they was in Yorkshire. He's such a trusty lad." Mary was afraid that she might begin to ask difficult questions, but she did not. She was very much interested in the seeds and gardening tools, and there was only one moment when Mary was frightened. This was when she began to ask where the flowers, Martha began to ask where the flowers were to be planted. "Who did thou ask about it?" she inquired. "Well, I haven't asked anyone yet," said Mary, hesitating. "Well, I shall ask the head garden. He's too grand. I wouldn't ask the head garden. He's too grand. Mr. Roach is." "I've never seen him," said Mary. "I've only seen undergardeners and Ben Weatherstaff." "If I was you, I'd ask Ben Weatherstaff," advised Martha. "He's not half as bad as he looked for all he's so crabbed. Mr. Craven lets him do what he likes because he was here when Mrs. Craven was alive, and he used to make her laugh. She liked him. Perhaps he'd find you a corner somewhere out the way." "If I was out of the way and nobody wanted it, no one could mind my having it, could they?" said Mary anxiously. "There wouldn't be no reason," answered Martha. "You wouldn't do no harm." Mary ate her dinner as quickly as she could, and when she rose from the table, she was going to run into her room to put on her hat again, but Martha stopped her. "I've got something to tell you," she said. "I thought I'd let you eat your dinner first. Mr. Craven came back this morning. I think he wants to see you." Mary turned quite pale. "Oh," she said. "Why? Why? He didn't want to see me when I came. I heard Pitcher say he didn't." "Well," explained Martha, "Mrs. Medlock says because her mother, she was walking to Twate village and she met him. She never spoke to him before, but Mrs. Craven had been to our cottage 2 or 3 times. He'd forgotten that, but Mother hadn't, and she made bold to him. I don't know what she said to him about you, but she said something has put him in the mind to see you before he goes away again tomorrow." "Oh," cried Mary, "he's going away tomorrow? Oh, I'm so glad." "He's going for a long time. I make him come back to autumn or winter. He's going to travel in foreign places. He's always doing that." "Oh, I'm so glad, said Mary thankfully. If he did not come back until winter or even autumn, there would be time to watch the secret garden come alive. Even if he found out then and took it away from her, she would have had at least that much. "When do you think he will want to see—" She did not finish the sentence because the door opened and Mrs. Medlock walked in. She had on her best black dress and cape and cap and her collar that fastened with a large brooch with a picture of a man's face on it. It was a colored photograph of Mr. Metlock, who had died years ago, and she always wore it when she dressed up. She looked nervous and excited. "Your hair's rough," she said quickly. "Go and brush it. Martha, help her slip her on her best dress. Mr. Craven sent me to bring her to her in his study." All the pink left Mary's cheeks. Her heart began to thump, and she felt herself changing into a stiff, plain, silent child again. She did not even answer Mrs. Medlock, but turned and walked into her bedroom, and followed by Martha. She said nothing while her dress was changed and her hair was brushed, and after she was quite tidy, she followed Mrs. Medlock down the corridors in silence. What was there for her to say? She was obliged to go and see Mr. Craven, and he would not like her, and she would not like him. She knew what he would think of her. She was taken to a part of the house she had not been into before. At last, Mrs. Medlock knocked at a door, and when someone said, "Come in," they entered the room together. A man was sitting in an armchair before the fire, and Mrs. Medlock spoke to him. "This is Miss Mary, sir," she said. "You can go and leave her here. I will ring for you when I want you to take her away," said Mr. Craven. When she went out and closed the door, Mary could only stand waiting, a plain little thing twisting her thin hands together. She could see the man in the chair was not so much a hunchback as a man with a high, rather crooked shoulders, and he had black hair streaked with white. He turned his head over his high shoulder and spoke to her. "Come here," he said. Mary went to him. He was not ugly. His face would have been handsome if it had not been so miserable. He looked at the sight of her, worried and fretted him, and as if he did not know what in the world to do with her. "Are you well?" he asked. "Yes," answered Mary. "Do they take good care of you?" "Yes." He rubbed his forehead fretfully as he looked her over. "You are very thin." "I'm getting fatter," Mary answered in what she knew was her stiffest way. What an unhappy face he had. His black face seemed as if it scarcely saw her, as if they were seeing something else. His black eyes seemed as if they scarcely saw her, as if they were seeing something else, but he could scarcely keep his thoughts upon her. "I forgot you," he said. "How could I remember you? I intended to send you a governess or a nurse or someone like that of sort. I forgot." "Please," began Mary. "Please." Then the lump in her throat choked her. "What do you want to say?" he inquired. I am too big for a nurse," said Mary, and please don't send me a governess yet." He rubbed his forehead again and stared at her. "That's what the Sowerby woman said," he muttered absent-mindedly. Then Mary gathered a scrap of courage. Is she Martha's mother?" she stammered. "Yes, I think so," he replied. "She knows about children," Mary said. "She has 12. She knows." He seemed to rouse himself. "What do you want to do?" "I want to play out of doors," Mary answered, hoping that her voice did not tremble. I never liked it in India, but it makes me hungry here, and I'm getting fatter." He was watching her. Mrs. Sowerby said it would do you good." "Perhaps it will," he said. "She thought you had better get stronger before you had a governess." "It makes me feel strong when I play and the wind comes over the moor," argued Mary. "Where do you play?" he asked next. "Everywhere," gasped Mary. Martha's mother sent me a skipping rope, and I skip and run, and I look about to see if things are beginning to stick up out of the ground. I don't do any harm." "Don't look so frightened," he said in a worried voice. "You could not do any harm, a child like you. What may you like to do?" Mary put her hand up to her throat because she was afraid he might see the excited lump which she felt jumped into it. She came a step nearer to him. May I?" she said tumultuously. Her anxious little face seemed to worry him more than ever. Don't look so frightened, he exclaimed. Of course you may. I'm your guardian, though I'm a poor one for any child. I cannot give you time or attention. I'm too ill and wretched and distracted. But I wish you to be happy and comfortable. I don't know anything about children, but Mrs. Medlock is to see that you have all you need. I sent for you today because Mrs. Sowerby said I ought to see you. Her daughter had talked about you. She thought you needed fresh air and freedom and running about. She knows about all children, Mary said again in spite of herself. She ought to, Mr. Craven said. I thought you rather bold to stop me on the moor, but she said Mrs. Craven's had been kind to her. It seemed hard for him to speak his dead wife's name. She is a respectable woman. Now that I see you, I think she said sensible things. Play outdoors as much as you like. It's a big place, and you may go where you like and amuse yourself as you like. Is there anything else you want? As if a sudden thought had struck him. Do you want toys or books, dolls? Might I, quavered Mary, might I have a bit of earth? In her ignorance, she did not realize how queer the words would sound and that they were not, sorry, they were not the ones she had meant to say. Mr. Craven looked quite startled. Earth? He repeated, what do you mean? To plant seeds in, to make things grow and to see them come alive, Mary faltered. He gazed at her a moment, then passed his hand quickly over his eyes. Do you care about gardens so much? He said slowly. I didn't know about them in India, said Mary. I was always ill and I was tired and it was too hot. I sometimes made little beds in the sand and stuck flowers in, but here it is different. Mr. Craven got up and began to walk slowly around the room. A bit of earth, he said to himself, and Mary thought that somehow she must have reminded him of something. When he stopped and spoke to her, his dark eyes looked soft and almost kind. You can have as much earth as you want, he said. You remind me of someone else who loved the earth and things that grow. When you see a bit of earth you want, with something, he said, something with a smile. Take it, child, and you make it come alive. May I take it from anywhere, if it's not wanted? Anywhere, he answered. There, you must go. I am tired. He touched the bell to call Mrs. Medlock. Goodbye. I should be away all summer. Mrs. Medlock came so quickly that Mary thought she must have been waiting in the corridor. Mrs. Medlock, Mr. Craven said to her, now I have seen the child. I understand what Mrs. Sowerby meant. She is much less delicate before she must be much less delicate before she begins lessons. Give her simple, healthy food. Let her run wild in the garden. Don't look after her too much. She needs liberty and fresh air and romping about. Mrs. Sowerby is to come and see her now and then, and she may sometimes go to the cottage. Mrs. Medlock looked pleased. She was relieved to hear that she need not look after Mary too much. She had felt her a tiresome charge and had indeed seen as little of her as she dared. In addition to this, she was not fond of Martha's mother. In addition to this, she was fond of Martha's mother. Thank you, sir, she said. Susan Sowerby and me went to school together, and she's as sensible and good-hearted a woman as you'd ever find in a day's walk. I've never had any children myself, and she's had 12, and there never were healthier or better ones. Miss Mary can get no harm from them. I've always take Susan Sowerby's advice about children myself. She's what you might call healthy-minded, if you understand me. I understand, Mr. Craven said. Take Miss Mary away now and send Pitcher to me. Mrs. Medlock left her at the end of her own corridor. Mary flew back to her room. She found Martha waiting there. Martha had, in fact, hurried back after she had removed the dinner service. "I can have my garden," she said. "I may have it where I like. I am not going to have a governess for a long time. Your mother is going to come see me, and I may go to the cottage. He said a little girl like me could not do any harm, and I may do whatever I like anywhere." "Eh?" said Martha delightedly. "That was nice of him, wasn't it?" "Martha," said Mary solemnly, "he is a really nice man. Only his face is so miserable, and his forehead is all drawn together." She ran as quickly as she could to the garden. She had been away so much longer than she had thought she should, and she knew Dickon would have to have set out early on his 5-mile walk. When she slipped through the door under the ivy, she saw he was not working where she had left him. The gardening tools were laid together under a tree. She ran to them, looking all around the place, but there was no Dickon to be seen. He had gone away, and the secret garden was empty, except for the robin, who had just flown across the wall and sat on a standard rosebush watching her. "He's gone," she said woefully. "Oh, was he only a wood fairy?" Something white fastened to the standard rosebush caught her eye. It was a piece of paper. In fact, it was a piece of the letter she had printed for Martha to send to Dickon. It was fastened on the bush with a long thorn, and in a minute she knew Dickon had left it there. There were some roughly printed letters on it, a sort of picture. At first she could not understand what it was. Then she saw it was meant for a nest with a bird sitting on it. Underneath were printed the letters, and they said, "I will come back."